Hello there, my fellow myth and fantasy nerds. My name is Tanner, and I'd like to welcome you back to my YouTube channel. Why, yes, I am wearing another new sweater. I got this one around the same time as the one in my other video, and just like with that one, I think this looks and feels quite nice on me. Seriously, I don't know if you can see it, but it's got like Sherpa lining on the inside, and it's just so nice and soft and warm and comfy. But anyway, this week's video will be part 4 of the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol. To recap, in last week's video, link up in the cards and in the description down below, Ebenezer Scrooge met the ghost of Christmas Present, who showed him just how much he was missing out on Christmas. What with the parties he could have been invited to by Bob and Fred, and that Christmas should be a time of celebration, no matter whether you're rich or poor. So on that note, as always, please make sure to leave a like on this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe down below. Pretty please! It'll help me make more content for you. And without further ado, here is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Part 4. The spirit slowly approached him, as silent as the grave, and when it stopped in front of him, Scrooge fell to his knees. It seemed as though the spirit's mere presence spread darkness and secrecy. The spirit was clothed in a cloak as dark as the night around it, with its hood pulled up. The only thing the cloak didn't cover was one hand, which the spirit held out in front of it. It was this hand that kept the spirit from disappearing into the night completely. They were a tall and impressive being, and as he was in the spirit's company, Scrooge felt an overwhelming feeling of awe and horror. He knew nothing else, as the spirit didn't move, or even so much as speak to him. "Am I standing in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?" Scrooge asked the spirit. They said nothing, but instead kept pointing with their hand. "Am I correct in saying that you will be showing me the things that have not happened yet, but will happen in the coming years?" The spirit's hood dipped for a quick second, as if nodding yes. That was the only thing Scrooge got as an answer. Even though at this point Scrooge was used to the company of spirits, ghosts, and phantoms, this spirit frightened him most of all. He found his knees knocking so much he could barely stand. The spirit stood there, watching him, and giving him time to get himself together. This caused Scrooge's anxiety to worsen, knowing that behind that cloak and hood ghostly eyes stared at him, while he couldn't see anything except for a black shroud and a pointing hand. "Great Spirit of the future," Scrooge said, "out of all of the other spirits who've visited me, you are the one that I am the most frightened of. I know your true goal is my best interests, and I hope that I will be a changed man after this night, so I will gladly follow you, wherever you may lead me, and I will take whatever lessons you teach me to heart." He paused, waiting for a response. When none came, he said, "Won't you talk to me?" The spirit said nothing, and continued pointing. "Very well, spirit, take me where you will. The morning is approaching fast, and there's no time to waste. Take me where you will." With that, Christmas yet to come moved away just as solemnly as they came. Scrooge immediately followed behind. though to him it seemed as though the train of the spirit's rope picked him up and carried him along. Soon enough the city appeared before them, as if springing up from the ground around them. There they were, in the very heart of the city, amongst the marketplaces, and the various customers moving this way and that way, with coins jingling in their pockets, or else talking to their fellows, checking their watches, fiddling with their ties and buttons. Scrooge saw them do this often enough. Soon the man and the spirit approached a small group of men talking together, and Scrooge, observing that the spirit's hand was pointing to the men, stopped to listen. "Well, I don't exactly know much about it," said a large man with a prominent chin. "All I know is he's dead." "When did it happen?" asked another. Sometimes last night, as far as I know." "What was wrong with him?" said a third, taking a large pinch of snuff from a golden box. "Knowing him, I thought the reaper would never come for him." Heaven only knows how," the first man replied, letting out a yawn. "What will happen to his money?" asked a man with a reddish face and a large lump on his nose. "Knowing the man he was, probably left it to his company," the large man said, letting out another yawn. "Certainly didn't leave it to me, anyway." There was a laugh all around at this. "It'll probably be a very inexpensive funeral, though," he continued. "I'm not entirely sure anyone will want to attend. What if we all go together and chip in a little?" "As long as lunch is provided," said the man with the lumpy nose. This joke prompted another laugh. "Well, I'm certainly not as interested as you all," said the large man. "I never wear black gloves, or eat lunch. I will offer to go, however, if no one else does." He paused before moving on. "Now that I think of it, I don't think I was his most special friend. I mean, we used to stop and chat whenever we met, but not much else as far as I remember." The group of friends soon dispersed and went their separate ways. Scrooge recognized them and looked towards the spirit, looking for answers. However, the spirit only pointed to two other men who were just stopping in the middle of the street. "Hello," said one man. "Hello! How you been? I've been well. How about you?" "I've been well. Did you hear old Penny Pincher himself finally gave up the ghost?" "I did hear about that, and about time, too. Rather chilly this morning, don't you think?" It's about right for Christmas time, in my opinion. Ever been ice skating?" "I haven't, but I've been thinking about it." "Well, see you later. See you later." Yeah, that was the whole conversation. Nothing more, nothing less. Scrooge recognized these men, too. They both were very important, very wealthy businessmen, and he took great care to hold himself to their business standards. Scrooge nearly fell on his old standard of questioning why the spirit put significance onto these seemingly meaningless conversations. However, he reminded himself that there may be something hidden beneath the surface, and decided to try and determine what that hidden meaning is. He figured that the death the men were talking about was not Jacob, because that was in the Christmas past, and this was in the Christmas future. He also couldn't think of anyone remotely close to him who this man could be. Having said that, though, he definitely figured that these conversations had some hidden meaning of some kind that would certainly benefit him. So Scrooge resolved to hang on to every word of every conversation the spirit led him to, and he would most certainly pay attention to future Scrooge whenever he saw him. He figured if he saw himself in the future, the final puzzle piece would fit into place, and he would finally understand what he should do to better himself. He looked around, trying to catch a glimpse of his future self. But what he saw was another man standing at his usual street corner. Although the hands of the clock were pointed at the time he would normally be there, Scrooge saw no one even closely resembling him amongst the crowd of people. He wasn't surprised, though. The thought of a change in disposition was spinning throughout his head, and he hoped his future self, wherever he was showing these changes in the future. Christmas Future stood beside him, silent as the grave, once again pointing the way Scrooge was supposed to go. Scrooge roused himself from looking around for himself and decided to follow where the finger was pointing, knowing full well that the spirit was watching him closely underneath that hood. The thought of unseen eyes staring at him chilled him to his bones. The two beings walked away from the bustling streets and went to a part of the town that was kept hidden away from all except those who knew where it was. Before this day, Scrooge was now one of the people in the know of its location, but he recognized it by its reputation. The streets were cramped and filthy. The shops and houses were pathetic. The inhabitants were all some combination of half naked, heavily inebriated, neglected, and hideous. The streets and entranceways were overflowing with grime and stink, and general crimes against nature itself. In fact, the entire district gave off an odor of rot, lawlessness, and suffering. Deep within this hotbed of corruption, a small pawn shop stuck out from under a dirty apartment, a place where anyone could buy or sell all kinds of garbage, from iron and rags to bottles and even bones. Inside the dirty room, there was a plethora of piles of trash. Rusted keys, locks, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and all kinds of scrap iron. All kinds of mystery items, best left uninspected, were made and hidden in piles of dirty rags, rancid grease, and old bones. Sitting by a stove in the middle of all the garbage he collected sat a hooligan of a man, who from his gray hair looked to be around 70. He had shielded himself from the winter wind by an assortment of mismatched curtains, and he was puffing on a pipe with the air of someone who was comfortably retired. Just as Scrooge and the spirit walked over to the man, there came bursting through the door three people, two women, one man, carrying large piles of items. As they all came in, the four individuals stared at each other in surprise, and then burst into shrieks of laughter. "Well, how's that for a coincidence?" the woman who walked in first said. "Who would have thought that the housekeeper, the laundress, and the undertaker would visit old Joe at the same time?" They all laughed at this notion. "You couldn't have picked a better meeting place," the old man, Joe, said to them. "Come into my parlor. I know you, Mrs. Dilber, at least," he said to the housekeeper, "were emancipated by his death, and the other two definitely are not foreign to me." He led the group to the small space behind the curtains, and Mrs. Dilber sat down on a stool opposite Joe and showed him the pile of things she carried in. "Believe me, Joe, if he wanted to keep them in death, he would have written them in his will. I bet he wished he had someone to take care of him on his deathbed rather than dying alone." "Too true, my dear madam, too true," said the undertaker, placing his bundle in front of old Joe. Joe scrutinized the items in the bundle. Not that there was a big pile. Couple of insignia, a pencil case, couple sleeve buttons, and a brooch, none of which were of much value. Joe inspected each of these and gave the undertaker a sum for everything. "That's as much as I can give, and I won't give you another sixpence to save my life." Mrs. Dilber was next. Her pile consisted of sheets and towels, a few odd pieces of clothing, two old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few pairs of boots. Joe gave her sum in a similar manner as the undertaker. I always give women more money. It's a weakness of mine, and it's going to be my downfall. You see if it doesn't. That's how much it's worth, and if you ask me for a penny more, I'll reform my weakness and knock off half a crown. The laundress was the last one to bring her bundle. There were so many knots keeping it together, Joe had to get down on his hands and knees to undo them. When he got the knots undone, he pulled out a roll of dark fabric. Are these his bed curtains? He asked. They are, came the reply. I don't suppose you ripped them off, rings and all, while he was still lying there. So what if I did? Oh, you were certainly born to strike it rich, and you'll certainly do so. Oh, believe me, I won't keep my hand to myself when I can get something by taking it, especially from the likes of him, she said, in an even tone. Ah, now don't drop anything on that blanket now. His blankets, I assume? Joe asked suspiciously. So what if they are? He's certainly not using them, is he? Well, of course not. I just hope he didn't die of anything contagious. Oh, we don't need to worry about that now, came the reply. I wasn't enough of a fan of his that I'd hang around him to catch anything. Also, she said, as he was inspecting an old shirt, you can look until your eyes are sore, but you won't find a hole in that shirt, nor will you find a faded spot. That was his best shirt, and it would have gone to waste if I didn't take it. What do you mean, waste? They'd have buried him in it, she said, laughing. Oh, someone tried, but I took it all of him. He couldn't look any uglier in that shirt than he could in another. Scrooge listened to this conversation with shock and dismay. As the group sat around their bundles of stuff by the light of Joe's oil lamp, Scrooge looked at them with loathing and revulsion. These feelings couldn't have been any worse if these four people were nasty monsters trying to sell the corpse itself. It's funny, isn't it? The laundress continued. He chased everyone around him away when he was alive, only to benefit us when he's dead. This remark caused an uproar of laughter once again. I see, Spirit, Scrooge said, shivering from his nightcap to his slippers. The situation of this dead man might be mine. My life definitely seems to be traveling down that path. Oh, merciful heaven, Spirit, what's this? Suddenly, Scrooge noticed he was standing next to a bed, with something laying down, covered by a sheet. The thing didn't make any noise, at least none that Scrooge could hear, but it definitely didn't need to speak to convey a message. The room was very dark as well, and even though it was hard to see anything, Scrooge still tried to figure out what kind of room it was. A pale light shone down on the bed from an unknown source, and on it, completely abandoned and stripped of possessions, was the dead body of a man. Scrooge looked back at the spirit, and he saw that their hand was pointed towards the head of the bed. The sheet covering the body was so disheveled that Scrooge only had to flick his finger, and the face would be completely uncovered. He thought about uncovering the body, but he figured he had as much power to uncover the body as he did to rid himself of the spirit standing next to him. Spirit, please, can we leave this ghastly place? I think if we do, I won't leave the lesson behind. Trust me. The spirit continued, pointing their hand to the bed. I understand what you want me to do, Spirit, but I don't have the strength to do it, or else I would. The spirit continued to look at him. Please, Spirit, Scrooge said, if there's anyone in the city that feels some kind of emotion at this man's death, please let me see them. Christmas yet to come spread its robe out like the wings of a large bird, and then withdrew it just as quickly. The scene it revealed was a day-lit room, with a woman and her children in it. The woman kept glancing up at the clock, with increasing eagerness. She would pace the room, look out from the window, glance up at the clock, try and fail to work on her embroidery, and she could hardly bear the noise of her children playing. Soon enough, there was a knock on the door, and she immediately went to greet her husband. Though he was a fairly young man, the husband's face was skinny and crestfallen. There was an unusual expression on this face, some kind of delight that he was trying and failing to suppress. They all sat down to dinner, and after a long silence, she asked him what news he had. He seemed embarrassed to even want to talk about it. "Is it good news or bad news?" she asked helpfully. "Bad. We're bankrupt, aren't we?" "No, Caroline, we still have some hope." "Oh, has there been a Christmas miracle? Has he actually relented?" "I'm afraid he's beyond relenting, my love. He's dead." The woman cried out in delight at this news, but then said a quick prayer of forgiveness for rejoicing at death. "You remember about the half-drunk woman I talked to last night? She turned me away when I tried to get an extension from him. I thought it was just an excuse not to talk to me, but turns out she was telling the truth. Not only was he sick, but he was at death's door. Who will be his replacement? Where will our debt go? I'm not sure, but we'll be ready by then. And even if we don't have the money, I highly doubt that his replacement will be as merciless as he was. We will sleep soundly tonight, love." The house seemed to lighten at this, and Scrooge was distraught to find that the only emotion the spirit could show him at this man's death was joy. "Spirit, please show me kindness and sympathy associated with the death. I fear that a dark room might haunt me if I don't see something." The spirit led him to the very familiar house of the Cratchit family. When they entered, Scrooge noticed that Mrs. Cratchit and her children were sitting around the fire. It was quiet, too quiet. The youngest Cratchit children sat in the corner, as still as statues, and they were listening to Peter, who was reading them a book while their mother and sisters were sewing. Mrs. Cratchit laid her sewing on the table and rubbed her eyes. The color, it hurts my eyes," she said. And when the others voiced their concern, she said, "It just makes them weak by candlelight, and I don't want to show weak eyes to your father when he gets home." "He must be almost home." "Well, he does seem to walk slower on his way home these days, Mother," Peter said. They were quiet again, until Mrs. Cratchit spoke up yet again. "I know. He used to walk very far, with Tim on his back." The others murmured their agreement that yes, they knew this too. "Tim never was very heavy for him. Besides, your father loved him so very much, it didn't matter to him either way." Soon they heard Bob at the door, and the family went over to greet him. Mrs. Cratchit helped with his scarf, and the children scrambled to get him his tea. Bob took this all in stride, and he remarked at how wonderful the tablecloth had come along. He even said how he wouldn't be surprised if they got it done before Sunday. "Sunday," Mrs. Cratchit said. "You went today then, Robert?" "Yes, my love," Bob answered, "and I do wish you'd gone with me. I think you would have loved how green it is. I'm sure you'll see it often enough. I promised I'd come visit every Sunday." As he said this, his voice broke, and he started sobbing with grief. "My boy, my little boy." His children and wife came over to mourn with him, and then they soon made their way to the room above, which was decorated for Christmas. Over in the corner there was a small chair, with a small crutch leaning against it, and a picture of a small child resting upon it. With their grief resolved, the Cratchits all sat down by the fire, and Bob told them of a run-in with Fred he had earlier that day. He asked me what was bothering me, and when I told him, he gave me his sincerest condolences. And he said to me, if there is anything at all I can do to help, don't hesitate to ask. He even gave me his card, which had his address on it. It almost seemed as if he had known Tim and was mourning him with us. I'm sure he's a wonderful man, Mrs. Cratchit said to him. You would have been sure of that had you met him, love, came the reply. Believe you me, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he could find Peter a better job. But we have plenty of time until then. He wiped his eyes and then continued. However, and whenever we go our separate ways, will we still keep the memory of Tiny Tim in our hearts? Of course, father, the Cratchit children said. And when we remember his gentle and forgiving soul, even as a small child, we won't argue amongst ourselves easily and forget him while doing so? Never, father, the Cratchit children said. Then we shall be very happy indeed. The Cratchits all moved in and hugged each other, and it seemed as though Tiny Tim's spirit was still felt among them. Spirit, Scrooge said, watching this scene, I'm getting the feeling our time together is close to its end. I don't know how I know, but I just know. Can you and will you tell me who that man lying dead under the sheet was? Christmas yet to come led him back to the town square where they started, and Scrooge said to them, my place of business is close by. Are you going to show me what I'm like in the future? The spirit said nothing, but pointed in the opposite direction from where Scrooge wanted to go. Why are you pointing that way? Scrooge asked. There came no reply, and the hand still pointed away. Scrooge stubbornly ran to the window of his office, and looking in, he saw that there was still an office, but it wasn't his office. There was no familiar furniture, and the person sitting in the chair was not his future self. The spirit kept pointing away, and Scrooge finally decided to follow them to see what they wanted him to see. They moved until they came upon an iron gate, which led to the churchyard in the adjacent cemetery. Scrooge knew this was where he would get his answer, as the man had to have been buried here. The plot of land was decent enough, though it seemed overgrown with plants and weeds, and it seemed to be a bit overcrowded with graves. The spirit walked past some of them and then stopped, pointing to one gravestone in particular. Even though their appearance hadn't changed, Scrooge saw a new significance in the spirit's cloaked and hooded appearance. Spirit, before I read the name on that stone, I just have to know, are these the visions of things that will happen, or only what might happen? The spirit said nothing, but continued pointing to the stone. I know that the paths people choose to follow imply certain outcomes if they continue walking down them, but if you choose a new path, the outcome will change. Am I right? There was no reply. The spirit kept pointing to the stone. Scrooge screwed up his courage and read the name carved in the stone. The name was Ebenezer Scrooge. Was that me laying on the bed covered by a sheet? Scrooge sobbed on his knees. The spirit moved their finger from the grave to him and back again. Please, spirit, say it isn't so. The spirit didn't move. Spirit, listen to me. I'm not the man I was. I promised to change my ways after tonight. Why are you showing me this future if I'm beyond all help? The spirit's hand appeared to tremble, the first movement Scrooge saw from it that wasn't pointing. Kind spirit, benevolent spirit, Scrooge continued as he knelt to the ground in petition. I know that you, like the other spirits who visited me, intervened for my benefit. Please tell me that I can change the future you've been showing me by changing my life in the present." The spirit's hand trembled in what seemed like pity. "Spirit, I promise to rekindle the spirit of Christmas in my heart and in my soul, and uphold it through the rest of the year as well. I promise that the message you and the other spirits taught me will stay with me for the rest of my days. Please tell me that I can wipe away the words written on this stone. Please." In his misery, he grabbed the spirit's hand and held it tight. The spirit tried to free himself, but he held firm and pleaded with the spirit. But they were stronger than him and overpowered him. As he held his hands in one last prayer for his future to be changed, Scrooge saw that the spirit was changing in front of him. They disappeared, shrinking and changing in shape, until Scrooge only saw his bedpost. And there we have it. That was part 4 of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. If you liked this video and you want more, please consider leaving a like and subscribing down below so you don't miss any new content from me. Also, if you have any other ideas for any future videos, please leave your suggestions in the comments down below. Who knows? It might just happen. Alright, well, that's all the time I have for this video, so I'll see you all actually later this week with the exciting conclusion of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. See you guys then.